Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on January the 17th, 2016. Now this is part 2 on becoming bankers' bail-ins, as they call the theft, the authorised and legalised theft. When government approves it, it's legalised, you see, of your accounts in the banking system, things like that. So everything's planned long years in advance, folks, even before the last supposed crash. The last crash is only part of it. In fact, back in the days of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, they basically took all the government controls and watchdogs off the overseeing all the banking system and so on, and says, let the market decide. It'll work out fine by magic, you know. And of course, you hand all authority to the wolves, and you had 2008 crisis and all that entailed with the massive frauds that went on, and nobody went to jail for it or anything else. And the money just simply disappeared to money heaven, according to Alan Greenspan and others. Money heaven. And I guess he and his cronies have got the keys of Peter or something to get in there, or Michael. But anyway, there you go. So we're heading towards the plan. And I said it wouldn't happen, you see, until they'd push through the other part of the big plan to bring in their global society and crisis, of course. It's going to be crisis creation to bring in the big next part of the plan. They'd have to wait until they'd come to their signed agreements. They don't call them treaties anymore, because then it has to go through public debate and all the rest of it, or at least congressional debate or parliamentary debates. They don't want the public involved in these things, so they're called agreements, but they're putting it through as the same force of a treaty, basically. And so they want to really plunder you that way too. You pay into dire austerity, which is poverty, for the privilege of being alive under their system, so they can manage your lives properly and decide what you should buy and eat, and if anything at all, and definitely not meat. They want you off meat altogether and things like that. Or for those that can afford it, of course, those that, like government employees, they can still afford their roast, etc. But for the rest of the people, no, it's just going to be priced out of sight. Then they give you that like a meat stuff they have for the bologna sandwiches. It's made out of chicken hash and all other kinds of leftovers and things all mixed together, and they call it meat, you see. That's been the new normal for a lot of people for a long time now, in fact. So tonight I'll go over the next part, of course, of the same series to do with the coming bail-ins and so on. You know, you get bored sometimes with life, because when you've read all their plans and you knew what they wanted to do long, long ago, and they had all their meetings, the ongoing meetings annually, all the different organizations that are subsidiaries of the one big world organization, and they put out their reports occasionally. Nobody reads them. The media journal doesn't report on them at all, because they're part of it too. They're meant to give you little feel-good stories, things like that don't make any difference to anything. And sports, of course, it's the same thing there, where grown men get paid millions of dollars to keep you mesmerized, running around playing a children's game. So, you know, I just simply cut to what is reality, what reality is, as opposed to what you're conditioned to think it is, and what's normal. Anyway, this article here says investors cry foul over bank bail-ins. Some kept kind of quietish in the West a little bit, didn't make a big deal about it. It says it was an unpleasant late Christmas present for some of the world's biggest investors. They woke up on December the 30th to find that Portugal had announced plans to impose heavy losses on almost 2 billion euros of senior bonds at Novo Banco, the bank created from the ruins of Banco Espírito Santo. I guess the spirit left that bank, you know. But it says the controversial move, prompting threats of lawsuits from some investors, was the latest in a series of rescue operations launched for struggling banks in Greece, Italy, and Portugal in the last few weeks of 2015. In each case, national authorities were rushing to complete the financial reorganizations before tougher new rules were introduced across the European Union at the start of the year, dictating how failing banks should be restructured. Alexander Birry, credit analyst at Standard & Poor's, said, "There's a changing of the guard. The control of the process moves to a European body." It'll be the same bunch. Yeah, I guarantee you, folks. Everything's illusion, you know. Europe's new system, which puts bank bondholders at risk of a bail-in, That means you grab your bonds, you lose them basically, rather than leaving taxpayers on the hook for a bailout. But that's a lie too, because they're going to also bail in from the taxpayers too. When you read the wording of it all, they're very clever, these sods at the top. They've been at this for a long, long time. It says, was cemented with the creation on January 1st of the Single Resolution Board. There you go. Another board, self-appointed board by the same banking establishment. This new Brussels-based body will take over responsibility for deciding when a bank has failed and for overseeing its resolution, they call it. Thomas Hurtes, partner at EY and former UK regulator, says, in my view, what is driving this rush of activity is a concern about the shift of power to the SRB and away from the national regulators. It is the new authority as well as the new rules. Some investors are warning that the inconsistent, confusing way the authorities are dealing with bank failures in the early days of Europe's new banking union. There's the thing. It was planned to do all that once they got the whole lot unified, folks. Now you plunder them all and bring in the next part of the new system. You see, it says, well, banks still need to issue more debt that can be bailed in, stolen from the public. Overall bank bond issuance has been stagnating in Europe. Last year it fell by more than 10% to 196 billion euros, excluding covered bonds. Analysts suggest sales of bonds may rise this year, or may rise in part to meet the new requirements. So it's just a lot of the usual investor mythologies here they keep pushing about how they're dealing with it. Everything's meant to go down into a world crisis. And the whole plan, when they established the Bank for International Settlements, the private bank, you see, established by themselves, by the way, by the private organization, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, and it comes from foreign relations, the American branch. Now it's worldwide, with this trilateral commission arm. All sound very official, but they're all private, one club. They set up the BIS, the IMF, and all the rest of it to take over the power of every nation and put it onto their own hands, you see. So we're somebody living through the big, long, over a century script here. This article here, Fed ends the too big to fail lending to collapsing banks. And it's not true again. When you read through their massive thousands of pages and so on, you find out, no, there's still little loopholes of how they can decide if you're still eligible for helping bail out from the using the taxpayers' money, the collapsing bank, as well as allowing them to bail in or steal the depositors' money. It's all been signed into law, folks, and I read the articles a long time ago. The Federal Reserve is cutting its lifeline to big banks in financial trouble. Big joke. So the Fed officially adopted a new rule Monday that limits its ability to lend emergency money to banks. And the new rule should quash the notion that Wall Street banks are too big to fail. The translation is the government has to save them during a crisis. The Fed's new restrictions come from the Dodd-Frank Act of 2010, which brought in a wave of reforms after the financial crisis. Under the new rule, banks that are going bankrupt or appear to be going bankrupt can no longer receive emergency funds from the Fed under any circumstances. If the rule had been in place during the financial crisis, it would have prevented the Fed from lending to insurance giant AIG. The Bear Stearns Fed chair Janet Yellen points out. It's a joke. It's all crooks that are in place everywhere, every single name that you mention. Politicians like Senator Elizabeth Warren have pushed the Fed to end such emergency lending to banks that are going under. She doesn't think the Fed's new rule goes far enough. There's still loopholes that the Fed could exploit to provide another backdoor bailout to giant financial institutions. So they put in loopholes into the new laws, you see. So they can, don't forget the bankers speak with forked tongue, you know. It says at first glance, new rules sounds like a common sense change. If a bank is going under, American taxpayers shouldn't be bailing it out. However, it's important to note that the new rule allows the Fed to judge by its own measures whether a firm qualifies for its emergency aid. See, there's the thing. It's important to note that the new rule allows the Fed to judge by its own measures, for their own measures, whether a firm qualifies for its emergency aid. The idea is that the Fed can still lend to banks during times of emergency, but the bank must be able to pay it back. Yet the true health of a bank in turmoil can be very difficult to assess. And still trying to be making clear guidelines and so on, which won't happen. And it says here, the Fed performs now the stress tests on banks to see how they perform in a mock financial crisis scenario. Well, the first thing they'll do in all these big banks, the top staff and CEOs now will be making sure that the Swiss bank accounts are all safe and protected, etc., because that's where they're... You think, as I say, since they deregulated the banks back in the days of Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and gave them a free hand to do what they wanted to do, which helped to lead to the massive plundering of people in 2008 onwards to the present time, you find that they knew darn well what was going to happen. All you heard, by the way, from the days of Thatcher and Reagan to the first bank crisis was even during the bank crisis, and then after the bank crisis of 2008, was the extra billions they were giving the top CEOs and top analysts, etc., at the banks to take home as a bonus. That's all you heard. And some of the banks that got bailed out published the fact that they were giving millions of dollars as bonuses to these CEOs right after it. But we live in an utterly corrupt system. Money itself is a con. It's never worth the same buying power from one day to the next. Did you decide on that? No, someone you'll never meet in your life decides that. You see? It's a joke. So the stress tests and so on to see how they perform in Euro can be seen as a warning sign from the Fed to big banks. Don't expect another bailout next time. I've said already from they've already mentioned they've left loopholes in there so they can see if they qualify or not for a bailout as well as the bail-in. So there you go. This article, it came out again some little while ago about Portugal. It says Portugal's bank bail-in sets a dangerous precedent. That was the 13th of January this year. As Europe belatedly gets around to repairing its weakest banks, investors who have lent to financial institutions by buying bonds face a brave new world. Their money can be effectively confiscated to plug balance sheet holes. In other words, they all have magical bookkeeping in banks, They have wizards working there, And they also have a bunch of priests that their own banking priests they basically worship Mammon, and these banking priests pray to their deity to make sure that all the cattle down below. They're going to get bail in our haircuts, they call it stealing your money. It won't know about it till the last second, till it's too late. You see? It says, let's begin with what before we get to the why. Here's what happened to the prices of 5 Portuguese bank bonds in the past few days. It says, last year Portugal divided Banco Espírito Santo, previously the nation's largest lender, into a good bank and a bad bank. If you owned any of those 5 bonds on Tuesday, you were owed money by Novo Banco, the good bank. On Wednesday, you were told that your bonds had been transferred to the BES, the bad bank. The Portuguese Central Bank selected 5 of Novo Banco's 52 senior bonds, worth about 1.95 billion euros, and reassigned them, thus backfilling, they're working on a building site, a 1.4 billion euro hole in the good bank's balance sheets that had been revealed in November by the European Central Bank stress tests of the institution. At the time of those tests, the value of Novo Banco bonds rose because the capital shortfall was lower than some investors had feared, and the good bank was widely expected to be able to mend the deficit by selling assets. Instead, December 30 switcheroo means selected bondholders are footing the bill. Here's where the shoe pinches. The documentation for senior debt typically stipulates that all such debt is what's called pari passu. That is, all securities rank equally, and none should get preferential treatment. It depends who you are, folks, and everything in this world. By removing just 5 bonds off the healthy bank's balance sheet, but what a price for the 5 bonds, as I've read already, Portugal has destroyed the principle of equality between debt securities. There's nothing inherently wrong with bailing in bondholders who lent a failing institution. In other words, you put your money in a failing institution and you lose, like a gamble. It's certainly preferable to the old solution of using taxpayers' money to shore up failed banks, and it's enshrined in the European Union's new Bank Resolution and Recovery Directive, which came into effect on January the 1st. But the principle of equal treatment for ostensibly identical securities is a key feature of the bond market. The investors fear that at the mercy of capricious regulatory decisions in a restructuring, they'll think more than twice before lending to banks. It goes on and on and on. No. As I say, the whole banking system and the money system is run by crooks, folks. Nothing new under the sun. Nothing new under the sun. And their magical priesthood makes sure the magic goes on into the magical accounting that they do. And all the stuff they claim that they've got, how much money they've lent out, how much money they've got to lend out versus what they have lent out on paper, which is always massively, grossly exaggerated, because that was made legal as well by their own governments long ago. It's all run by faith, you see. All faith. That's why in the US dollar bill they're a bit more honest. In God we trust, you know. Doesn't mean God's going to go along with you. He's God. He can do anything he wants, right? Yep. Cool science here. This one here, this article, Greek banks will have to tap bondholders for bail-in cash. So it's not just Portugal, right? Moody's warns. And you can't trust Moody's either, because they get paid, this organization or company, by the very companies they're supposed to be giving credit scores to and so on. It says investors in Greek banks' debt are likely to see their investments converted into shares, as to steal your money, your savings, and they turn it into shares, worthless shares, folks. And your governments all signed this, and I read the articles when every government, including Canada and the States, signed this into law from the Bank for International Settlements. Go into cuttingthroughmatrix.com, remember, and you'll hear the talk. You know. It says, as the bonds are ready to recapitalize the stricken lenders, Greece's troubled banks will have to tap bondholders for more capital, and the European Central Bank has studied the big 4 banks to see how they would cope with a new economic downturn. We're not in a depression, folks. They never use the word depression anymore, you see, because it had bad consequences the last time they used it. So we've always been in recessions, you see. Then we have upturns, etc., but in recessions, but never depressions, they call it. Yeah. It says, and found they needed an extra 14.4 billion euros of capital. Piraeus Bank has the biggest hole at 4.9 billion euros, while the National Bank of Greece is close behind at 4.6 billion. Alpha Bank needs to find 2.7 billion euro, and Eurobank is 2.1 billion euros short. The banks have been told to raise the money by the end of the year, and Greece's banks are still labouring under capital controls, which limit the amount of cash customers can withdraw each day. You're all going to be in the same boat, folks. And once they start lending cash, you know, through the big bank of banks for all the private central banks, believe you me, that's the end of it. Because once everything's still got compound interest with this money they lend to countries that are going under. It's meant, see, compound interest is so that you can never get out of debt. That's the law. Way back to the Old Testament gives you a clue how it works. You'll find in the Old Testament, it wasn't just the old prophets who channeled God, apparently, and they always lambasted the merchants who were selling things at markets by fake, faulty, deliberately faulty, of course, weights and measures and things like that, but also to do with the borrowing scam. Because in those days, and it really hasn't changed, it's just the illusion and the way that it's run today. It's very, very clever, actually. But in the old days, if a guy got into debt slavery, he was literally a slave. When you borrow, you're a slave, which also means your governments are slaves when they go off cap in hand all the time to the big lenders for cash. They're putting you all down as slaves as well. I hope you realize that, because you vote for them, you see. And in the Old Testament, if a guy went in, his wife would get brought in as well. And then any kids that they bore during their slave period were owned as well by the slave master, until the slave master said that the bond was paid. Generally never, because they used compound interest as well, you see, of what was owed by the borrower, who's now a slave, and his family. And they tacked in as well their accommodations, that little shack there, and how much food you had up to the present time, and that was all double, triple, quadruple charged, and so on, so on, so on. And keep you in perpetual slavery, because that slave master naturally wants your generations to come off you as well, because they're all producers, and you create money for him, you see. Nothing's changed. It's just an illusion. They don't call it slavery anymore. You don't call it that. You just go into austerity, like Greece and things like that. Oh, no, you're all austere now, you see. And you can't just go and work and earn money and use it on... No. They'll decide if there's any work for you to do. What they'll give you is the most meager, scrape by, whatever it is, for doing the same kind of jobs too, even production. You'll be getting third world countries' wages, like in China. And you're supposed to be grateful for that. They're never going to let you out the trap, folks. Which also means the generations to come. We're already living in a system, if you look at old movies from the 40s and 50s, and you see them go into a store, and there's the cans of this and cans, big cans too, of things, at 5 cents each. One movie I saw not long ago had a guy filling up with gas and getting his oil check done, the whole thing, and it was $1 total for complete, oil, the whole lot. They got 5 gallons of gas, complete oil check and the whole thing, some oil added. They got every window scrubbed for them by the attendant in the garage, and it was $1. And we take for granted, always amazed me how every year people who are still got jobs think, well, I'll get a pay raise, and you always get a pay raise about January or so. And you're always running backwards because the cost of devaluation of the currency and the price is going up all the time, massively. The price increases massively outweigh, and have for the 1980s, outweighed what you're actually earning. It's all a racket. It's a con job. Perfectly worked out. It's not by chance. And every dollar you get, about 80% of it now is basically going back to pay off debt. So you got 10 cents left to spend. So when you see something priced with $100, you're really only getting $10 worth of something. I mean, you just throw money around like crazy today, like it's like the peso. And it's all intentional. We all owe so much, supposedly, thanks to your democratic governments, going off to borrow money all the time from the big private lenders, who just, give you a little check, basically, and then their private Federal Reserve in the States and different ones. And we kind of used to get this done in Germany, printed in Germany. I don't know if it still is now, that are plastic money, and or plastic notes. And they're worth less and less and less all the time. Debt is lent into circulation, basically, because of the money you already owe. Your governments already owe for getting that dollar in the first place. So that's the racket we're living. So if you think that getting sold into bondage, into slavery because of debt was long gone, no, it's an illusion, folks. It's long gone. You just don't have the slave master standing over you with a whip right now. That's all. Jefferson said the same thing. When you see a generation born with a previously existing debt from a previous generation to pay off, then you know that you're a slave. And that's been the same way for an awful long time, folks. It's a complete racket. Now, just to get back to the article about Greece and so on, it says at the end, I have to give you the story about how they're going to take the money from the investors or the bank, etc. If the banks cannot raise enough new funds, the government's rescue scheme, right? The Hellenic Financial Stability Fund, everything government's got is from the taxpayer, folks. Steps in. The HFSF has 25 billion euros of resources that it can call on to complete the recapitalization. So bail-in and also a bailout by the taxpayer. There you go. And then this article here, haircut battle due to kick off within weeks. And it says, the Grand Chamber comprising 15 judges of the European Court of Justice. If you want to see crooks, that's where you look for them, folks. Will hear a number of appeals brought by Cypriot bank depositors who lost their money in the March 2013 haircut. That's when their deposits were stolen, against the European Commission and the European Central Bank on February 2, 2016. The Sunday Mail has learned. Alper Riza QC, the Turkish Cypriot barrister who's an occasional contributor to Cypress Mail and Sunday Mail, along with Christopher Pacholides, solicitor, and Antonis Pacholides of the Cyprus Bar, that's their legal system, will represent the appellants in Luxembourg. That's for Europe. Riza says the appeal is of huge importance to many Cypriot depositors who lost billions in the 2013 haircut. I want to say what it is. Theft. Theft by the big banks. Why don't they say it? Theft. Call it a haircut. Oh, it'll grow back. Really? Steal your money. What's going to grow back? Well, you're back to these, magical priests that they've got faith in mammon, asking their God to regrow your hair, I guess. The case is also of general importance in the EU law, and the reason why the appeals will be heard by the Grand Chamber of the ECJ, comprising 15 top judges, is because previous case law is unclear whether the European Commission and the ECB act as EU institutions, in a dictionary here, or in a freestanding capacity when performing their tasks under the 2012 European Stabilisation Mechanism Treaty, he said. In June 2012, Cyprus applied to the EU for financial assistance to recapitalise Bank of Cyprus and Cyprus Popular Bank, which, like many banks in Europe, faced financial difficulties owing to the fallout from the Greek financial crisis and the EU's dismal handling of the crisis, resulting in the haircut, the theft of Greek government bonds, causing the two banks huge losses. The EU initially agreed to provide bank recapitalisation assistance as it was necessary to safeguard the Eurozone. Remember too, these banks across Europe and the world are completely interconnected since they're always lending and borrowing from each other to prop up the appearance on their books they've got lots of cash. That's what happened in 2008 too. Anyway, this goes through what's been happening there and so on, and how they basically stole 47% of uninsured deposits. That's ones that were over €100,000 that are not insured by the banks, basically. So if they had over that, but believe you me, if you had way under that, you still couldn't just draw your cash out of there, and I don't think you still can. You only get so much allowed per week or whatever. And that's how you think your money is yours. It's not yours. You put it into a bank, and it's the banks, folks. And as soon as you put it into the bank, they're investing it at massive rates in third world countries for, again, compound interest, fast, massive returns, and so on. You get your little tiny wee percent at the end of the year. and you wonder why you got in the bank in the first place. But this is the racket we live in, of chronology again. Everything we live in is called reality, is complete, cleverly set up, mind you, chronology. This article here is European Stability Mechanism. Doesn't that sound like, oh, nothing to worry about, eh? Nothing to worry about. I also put up a couple of PDFs about this too that came out from them. And you can have a good laugh at that as well. But it says here, European Stability Mechanism. What does it mean? Remember, we've got ones for North America too, because they're all signed under the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, the private group again. So it's an intergovernmental organization located in Luxembourg City, which operate under public international law for all Eurozone member states, having ratified a special ESM intergovernmental treaty. It was established on 27 December 2012 as a permanent firewall for the Eurozone to safeguard and provide instant access to financial assistance programs for member states of the Eurozone in financial difficulty, with a maximum lending capacity of 500 billion euros. It replaces two earlier temporary EU funding programs called the European Financial Stability Facility and the European Financial Stabilization Mechanism. All new bailouts for any Eurozone member states will now be covered by ESM, while the EFSF, I love it, isn't it? And the EFSM will continue to handle money transfers and program monitoring for the previously approved bailout loans to Ireland, Portugal and Greece. The treaty establishing the European Stability Mechanism stipulated that the organisation would be established if member states representing 90% of its capital requirements ratified the founding treaty. This threshold was surpassed with Germany's completion of the ratification process 27 December 2012, which brought the treaty into force on that date for 16 of the 17 members of the Eurozone. The remaining state, Estonia, which had only committed 0.19% of the capital, completed its ratification on 4th of October 2012. A separate treaty amending Article 136 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union to authorise the establishment of the ESM under EU law. You understand, this is their typical magical holy terminology they create, you see, to completely bamboozle the ordinary person. Most of them will just give up before you read all this stuff. Well, I'll leave it in their hands at the top. They must know what they're doing. And we always get screwed. Right? Anyway, it was planned to enter into force January 2013. However, the last of the then 27 European Union member states to complete the ratification of this amendment, the Czech Republic, did not do so until 23rd of April 2013, postponing its entry into force until May 2013. And it gives you the usual, as I say, magical terminology that they create to bamboozle you. You know, this mammon terminology of making something that's so simple appear so difficult to the average person. And that's true, the average person does say they must know what they're doing. I'll go back to sleep, I'll watch the stupid sports, and I'll guzzle stacks of rotten movies and stuff like that, and I'll just whistle and play. Because they must know, my parents, because how folks see governments today, they've been trained to look like that. They always think of themselves as children, no matter how old you are. My parents, the government, they'll take care of me. They must know what they're doing. They're very wise. And then this one here too, the Financial Stability Board, I'll put that up as well. An international body that monitors and makes recommendations about the global financial system, established after the 2009 G20 London Summit in April 2009 as a successor to the Financial Stability Forum. The board includes all G20 major economies, FSF members, and the European Commission, based in Basel, Switzerland. emerged from the Financial Stability Forum, blah, blah, a group of finance ministries, central bankers, and international financial bodies. That's who put it together, supposedly. It was founded in 1999 to promote international financial stability after discussions amongst the finance ministers and central bank governors of the G7 countries, and a study which they commissioned. And it goes through that. I'll put these articles up for you to wade through and try and keep your sanity when you're doing it, folks. Because I say, things are very simple. They obfuscate with incredible terminology and abbreviations and all the rest of it until you throw your hands up. It's not meant for you to understand what's really simple. Simple, folks. Anyway, here's the key part. The Financial Stability Forum met in Rome 28th, 29th March 2008 in connection with the Bank for International Settlements. Remember I read years ago about the Bank for International Settlements. It was set up to bring in a global society and manage the money and the debt of every country on the planet. We've all signed on to it under the bail-in programs and so on. That was a plan, and they had that plan set out long, long ago in the 30s, in the last century, onwards. And again, Carl Quigley, as I've mentioned before, who was an insider with a group that owns all this stuff and who makes world history because they always plan it in advance and make it happen, said that eventually the Bank for International Settlements would do exactly what I've just said. It will take over the financial systems of the world and the debt of the world and so on. They're going to be your new big slave masters, self-appointed, mind you, they're private, and they are going to be the top honchos from then on. I'll put this there tonight as well. I'll put it up and you can read for yourselves about it. It's very interesting. You got to understand what it really means. Big background behind it. And then you have EU, European Union takes member states to court over bail-in laws to protect the taxpayers. Brussels will refer 6 countries to the European Court of Justice over their failure to apply rules designed to stop taxpayer-funded bank rescues. The European Commission has taken legal action and so on against, including the Netherlands, Luxembourg, after they failed to implement rules protecting European taxpayers from funding billions in bank rescues. 6 countries will be referred to the European Court of Justice for the continued failure to transpose the EU's bail-in laws into national legislation. So once you join this stupid EU totalitarian organisation, it's anything but democratic. It was never meant to be democratic. You've got a secret commission at the top and the whole thing that runs this whole empire of Europe now. Basically told all the countries that became colonies, really, sub-colonies of this big massive conglomerate instead of nations like they used to be. They're telling them they better get, they're going to get fined and all better for not passing these laws into national legislation. The referral comes after the Commission issued a warning against Poland, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Sweden, Romania and the Czech Republic for their non-compliance earlier this year. The rules known as the Bank Recovery and Resolution Directive, BIRD, it's for the birds, are designed to stop citizens from ever having to foot the bill for saving banks from going bust, preventing a rerun of the events that imperiled Spain and Ireland in the wake of the financial crisis. And it says, instead, the BIRD will force, I'm not kidding you, you're getting the BIRD from these guys, it will force private shareholders and depositors to automatically take a hit worth 8% of their total liabilities before any official rescue money can be used to prop them up. So they're going to steal your money first, right? Should the ECJ rule against the member states, governments could be hit with a daily fine until the directive is fully implemented. Here's this private organisation telling you what to do, because it's really on behalf of these private safeguard institutions that are set up under the BIS that tells the Euro government what to do, you see. Europe's most powerful member state, Germany, has insisted on protecting citizens rather than private sector creditors. as its price for more financial risk sharing between governments across the euro. And you can see what's happening to Germany and all the countries too. Masses of immigrants cost billions of dollars, probably per week, the amount they bring in. And to house them and feed them clothing and all the rest of it and give them immediate welfare, etc. I mean, and we're supposed to get out this. Everything's been set up to make everything happen for a massive crisis. It's deliberate. It's deliberate, folks. You don't try to stop a bleed from your arm, say, and at the same time as you're doing it, you cut your throat. You see? You don't say, we're going to try and save the banking system and the people's money and all the rest of it, and the taxpayer as well as depositors. And that goes for your checking accounts too, folks. I hope you realise that as well. They'll steal it as well. You don't, and then you bring in masses of refugees and house and feed them and give them instant welfare as you go down the tubes, and still try to get back on your feet. No, this is deliberate. And they give you the lie, actually. Deposits of less than 100,000 euros will still be protected under the new regime. No, it will not. Because it's the very first thing they do is grab the top depositors, and they'll say, well, we're still failing. Then they go under that, you see. You see? And they go into the Greek banks again to flout Brussels under the New Bailout rules and all this kind of stuff. Now, I'll put up to the International Monetary Fund. It says, an international organization headquartered in Washington, D.C., of 188 countries working to foster global monetary cooperation. So headquarters, right, is in Washington, D.C. It says, secure financial stability, facilitate international trade, promote unemployment, because that's what it does, and sustainable economic growth, and reduce poverty around the world. You don't understand how many folk they've put under. You see, they give them the loans using your tax money, folks. This private institution uses your tax money to give loans out. And you think they're free and all that. Oh, yeah. And then when the folk can't pay because of the compound interest and stuff, they get their brother, the International Monetary, they go, well, basically themselves. What they do when you go under is they just grab your country as security, the whole country, and everything in it, you see, to get their money back. They cut your health care, everything. Diabetics die, they can't get their insulin, all that kind of stuff. That's already happened in countries. Hope you realise that. And over the course of a long time, they then own you, just like the Old Testament, they own you and everything in it, you know. If they do manage to get all their money back, your tuberculosis is out of sight, but everything goes away because there's no treatment, no antibiotics, nothing. This is formed in 1944 at the Bretton Woods Conference. This is, it came into formal existence in 1945 with 29 member countries and a goal, that was the con you see they used, of reconstructing the international payment system. Countries contribute funds to a pool through a quota system from which countries experiencing balance of payment difficulties can borrow money. So you can borrow money from the wolf. As of 2010, the fund had XDR 476.8 billion, which is about 755.7 billion US dollars at then current exchange rates, and so on. But you should really go through this, because you're going to hear a lot more in the near future when they start plundering your accounts, and you're going to see massive, even worse inflation than we have now. Inflation just means to me that you get less and less and less for your currency, for your pound, your euro, for your dollar, whatever it happens to be. Less and less and less. And then this is a doozy as well. This is another agreement, as they call it, an intergovernmental agreement, 21st May 2014, which did in Brussels, Belgium. And it says, the single resolution mechanism is one of the main pillars of the European Union's banking union, which centrally implements, in particular, participating member states, the EU's Bank Recovery and Resolution Directive. It was created by an EU regulation that entered into force 19th August 2014. Then they go into the SRF as well and so on. And you can have a good laugh reading through this as well. If you think you're not going to get fleeced incredibly well, more so than you've ever been fleeced before, that says a lot. Because I'm telling you, the idea, and we've got a lot of little tips and prompts that make us remember, austerity, austerity, austerity for the last few years. And then you all forgot it again, but you get little bits and almost subliminal austerity. You see, you're getting me. The new system they wanted to bring in at the very beginning when they set up all these institutions, long before the latest round, but long way back, even before the World War II, was to bring in a global system run by experts. Anybody born it would be literally, just like they're doing in Scotland now, under Gerfik, monitored from birth to death. And inspected by experts to see what your opinions are on things. And if there's anything wrong with your opinions on anything at all, you'll be sent off to get that screw loose in your head tightened a little bit and adjusted, you see. I'm not kidding you here. There's lots of books out now by the very think tanks that worked for these big institutions that are still here today running things. The Economic and Financial Affairs Council. And guess what they call it? Economic and Financial Affairs Council. ECOFIN. COFIN is one of the oldest configurations of the Council of the European Union. And it's composed of the economics and finance ministers of the 28 European Union member states, as well as budget ministers when budgetary issues are discussed. ECOFIN often works with the European Commissioner for Economic and Financial Affairs and the President of the European Central Bank. And it gives you what its tasks are supposed to be. And how it makes its supposed decisions and so on, and how it delegates its tasks to the Code of Conduct group. Literally, you need a whole set of brand new encyclopedias, all based with their terminology and their groups and so on, because if you think the world's run in a straightforward, logical, simple manner, no, it's deliberately obfuscated to make it difficult to understand for the average person what actually is ever going on. Deliberately. That's how they do it. Yep. And this other article too to do with markets and so on. And markets. Sell everything. 2016 will be a cataclysmic year, warns the Royal Bank of Scotland. Now, I think in the last bailout, the Royal Bank of Scotland already was owned pretty well. Majority of shares were owned by the British government in London. So it says that harrowing advice is from the Royal Bank of Scotland, which has warned of a cataclysmic year ahead for markets and advised clients to head for the exit. Don't wait, do not pass, go. Sell everything except high-quality bonds, warned Andrew Roberts in a note this week. He said the bank's red flags for 2016, falling oil, volatility in China, shrinking world trade, rising debt, weak corporate loans and deflation had all been seen in just the first week of trading. We think investors should be afraid, he said. Morgan Stanley warned this week that oil could touch $20 a barrel. RBS says if it falls below $30, then $16 is on the horizon. The world is in a global recession. No, it's called a depression, folks. We get countries into, or a few countries into a depression at one. Now they've got the world into it, you see. It's working. It's working. Everything's happening is, from your point of view, it's working, you see. They need it all to happen, to bring in the next part of the new system. So this terrible cocktail means investors should now be thinking about getting a return off capital, not return on capital. In other words, get your cash. RBS compares the market mood with that of 2008 before the collapse of Lehman Brothers and the start of the global financial crisis. Right now, actually, they're making room in money heaven. The Greenspan said the money went to last time. Yep. Making room in their vaults for what's going to come in. And it says, is this another 2008 for the stock market? At least then, emerging markets were there to save the world from complete collapse by you borrowing money from them. China, you see. China cannot this time around, let alone any other big emergency market. RBS remains deeply skeptical that Chinese authorities can right the ship anytime soon. It warns that without allowing a massive devaluation of its currency, around 20%, China can be of no help. We're past 20%, devaluing our currency for 20%. I mean, I'm sure China can do it too. RBS believes China suffered a massive outflow of capital in December, perhaps as much as $170 billion, with much of that going straight into the dollar. This is a chart showing the Chinese outflows in 2015 is surely now the most important chart in the world, concluded Roberts. And you can see this article for yourself too. Now I'll end tonight by one last article by Paul Craig Roberts, who shows you how the US, which is the same as every other country, manufactures its fake employment statistics month by month and year by year. Everything in the system is chronology. This article shows you how governments always, well, they lie, basically. Well, pretty well all the time, but everything, really. And that's just the way it is. Everywhere, though. Every country's the same. Yet another fabricated jobs report for the US. According to Friday's, that's January the 8th, payroll job numbers, almost 300,000 new jobs were created in December. Additionally, the previous 2 months were revised upward by 50,000 jobs. Partly, the equity market did not believe the report, with the averages moving down today. And the author says, as he pointed out almost monthly for what he thought could be approaching 2 decades, 20 years, the alleged job growth always takes place in non-tradable domestic services. That is, in areas that do not produce exports and have no competition from imports. Service economy, you see. He says this is the job profile of a third world country. Britain is the same, every other country in Europe is the same now pretty well. He says 12 years ago, he says, I predicted at a major Washington, D.C. conference that was nationally televised that in 20 years the US would have a third world economy of jobs offshoring, which benefits only corporate executives and shareholders, continued. And that's true, you know. When they signed a big deal years ago with China through the private World Trade Organization, and all your politicians were in it, your jobs were all uplifted and shifted over to China. And you paid for them to transport over there, by the way, and to set up in their buildings and everything over in China. And you also paid for any loss in profits that they claimed they would have made for the next 15 years in doing so, you see. Canada did the same. Every other country has signed on to did the same thing. Then you too, you'd be into a service economy. Getting back to the article, it says, jobs offshoring has continued, and judging by the payroll jobs reports from the US government, the US is already a third world economy. The prostitute financial media always reports the alleged jobs increase as if it were a great thing, testimony to the continuing strength of the American economy and so forth. Only a handful of us look at the data and reveal its meaning. And he goes on to say, allegedly the US economy has been in recovery since, if memory serves, June 2009. If so, it's an unusual recovery. Normally the rising job opportunities associated with economic recoveries bring entrance into the labour force. But the US labour force participation rate has been declining. In December 2015, there 1,185,000 fewer Americans in the labour force than in December 2014. Yet the working age population is higher today than a year ago. The reported unemployment rate does not include discouraged workers. That's workers who are unable to find jobs and they then have ceased to look for work. They're fed up. After maybe a year or two trying, they give up. The reported unemployment rate of 5% only counts non-discouraged workers who are still expecting to find a job. The actual unemployment rate, that is, the rate that includes Americans who've given up hope of finding employment, is 23%. Currently, there are 49,691,000 Americans of working age who are not in the labour force. In other words, the US gross domestic product is deprived of a large percentage of its labour input. Now we'll pay attention, unlike the financial press media, to the age groups who benefited, according to the BLS, from the 292,000 December new jobs. About half of the alleged new jobs, 142,000, went to the 55 years old over and age group. This age group consists primarily of retirees who found it necessary to supplement their retirement incomes and those of their near retirement who are not working in order to compensate for the lack of interest in their savings due to the Federal Reserve's zero interest rate policy. These are part-time, lowly paid jobs without benefits. Americans of prime working age, aged 25 years old to 54 years old, only received 16,000 or 5% of the new jobs. Those aged 46 to 54 lost 165,000 jobs. In other words, middle-aged people are losing their jobs before they can provide for their retirement. There are 527,000 more Americans working multiple jobs in December 2015 than in December 2014. Now, as we've done so often for many years, let's look at the make-believe jobs that the BLS claims. Almost all of them are in lowly paid domestic services, such as waitresses, bartenders, couriers, messengers, employment services, social services, and healthcare, primarily ambulatory healthcare services. The conclusion is that if we believe the payroll jobs report, the US is now an economy that only creates third-world jobs in lowly paid domestic services. And yet this non-economy on the verge of collapse is said by the idiots in Washington to be a superpower. But as I said, governments cannot tell the truth. They never tell the truth about anything. Never ever. And all the governments are the same. It's the first thing anybody's taught, and once you get up there into civil service and so on near the top, they find ways to fool the public. We can't give them this bad news. Must keep them in fantasy land, you see. And that's how it all works. It's all illusion. And most folk believe it, unfortunately. The ones that are still doing well, like the ones who are still civil services or work for government or something, they still believe it all. And teachers and so on. The general population working at their rotten jobs, they don't get indus-related pensions and all the rest of it, and all the golden parachutes. The ordinary folk, I think they're kind of wising up to an extent. They know it's been a con for an awful long time regarding jobs. Remember, folks, too, I can buy the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Help me tick along. You can donate as well to help me tick along. I know most of you are exhausted after Christmas and all that. You go off buying all the presents because you're trained from birth to do so by the commercial racketeers at the top. Everything that's supposed to even be holy gets turned into massive profit. The whole system is rigged, folks. From Hamish myself, you might hear Hamish once in a while when I'm talking, snoring in the background as he goes lying on he lays down in his bed when I'm talking, and he says, "Oh, here he goes again with that droning prattle," and falls asleep. Anyway, from Hamish myself, Ontario, Canada, it's good night. May your God or your gods go with you.